what do you lay out for your clients as a base case scenario right now when it comes to the White House and control of Congress as well? And what would that mean in terms of policy? Where are we going to see the biggest changes or the biggest, or just staying status quo?
Yeah, so our view is that the two most likely election outcomes are either a Democratic sweep, so Joe Biden wins the White House, Democrats control the House, and Democrats take back control of the Senate, or, as you mentioned, a status quo election. Trump wins re-election, Democrats keep the House, and Republicans control the Senate. And clearly, pretty significant big policy differences depending on those two election outcomes. At this point, I mean, if you look at all of the data, the national vote, the swing state, the national polls, the swing state polls, the demographic data, the direction of the country, things that we're looking at, all of this points in favor of Joe Biden. Also, many fewer undecided voters in 2020 versus 2016. So all is supportive of Joe Biden winning next week. But you have 5 days. We still have some things can change. So, I think it does seem that things are pointing in that direction. So, again, this Democratic sweep versus status quo. Under Democratic sweep, I think we should expect more government spending that will come into the form of a COVID relief bill, maybe an infrastructure bill, and then potentially some higher taxes. But Shirley, this is a really important point. It's something we're really trying to emphasize with our clients, is that even if Democrats sweep Washington, the majorities that they'll have, particularly in the Senate, will be very narrow. And that may mean that fiscal stimulus in particular may actually take longer to pass and may be smaller in scope than what the market expects. So it's not some binary outcome. Just because you control the Senate means you can get anything that you propose passed. In fact, you still need to work on a bipartisan basis, and you still need 60 votes. So something that I think that the market is being a little bit reductive in terms of their thinking about.
So, Libby, based on your two base case scenarios, which sectors are best to be positioned in?
Yeah, well, look, I think under a Democratic sweep, it's going to be very sort of in line with what the priorities that the Biden campaign have laid out. And we know that climate is going to be a big priority, both from a regulatory perspective and a legislative perspective. So, things like renewable energy will likely do well. We know infrastructure is likely under a Biden administration as well. And then also states and municipalities. We think those will do well, both because Democrats will prioritize funding for states and cities, and then also the expectation that there are going to be some higher taxes will probably help with muni valuations as well. So those are the sectors we think are likely to kind of do the best under a Biden administration. And then, status quo election, honestly, kind of status quo policy outcomes. Maybe you see Trump and Pelosi cutting a deal on infrastructure. But outside of that, we sort of expect sort of a status quo in terms of the sectors that have done well throughout the Trump administration would continue to do well if he were reelected.
Okay, can I put a third, less pleasant scenario in front of you, and that is the possibility of a contested outcome. Bank of America says in the event of a contested outcome, a 20% slide in US equities might be possible. What have you gamed out there?
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely would be a big drag in terms of risk appetites, a big source of market volatility for sure. I have to say that we think it is unlikely. And it is what we're trying to sort of clarify with our clients is that a delayed election outcome by a day or two, which is absolutely possible given the high volume of mail-in voting and just the process of counting those votes. But that a delayed outcome is very different from a disputed outcome. And we think the base case is that you may very well know the victor of the White House the day after the election, 2 days after the election, if not the election night itself. Particular because some of these really important swing states are likely to report their election outcome on election night, including Florida. So if Florida goes, say, for Joe Biden, I think you could expect the market to react that this would be a Biden win. So again, kind of our base case is you'll probably know sooner than later in terms of the election outcome. Sure, a disputed election outcome is a possibility, but we don't think it's probable at this point.
Libby, just quickly, what are you expecting in terms of trade policy? Because, of course, we have had to deal with President Trump's tariffs for the past few years. What are we going to see there?
And Shirley, you and I have talked about this quite a lot over the period of the Trump administration. And the interesting thing on China policy is that I don't think the strategic objectives around China will actually change very much as it relates to sort of a Biden administration. It will, I think, will still be a more kind of hardline approach towards China. I think the tactics will be different. I think it will not be trade policy by tweet anymore. It'll be a more predictable policy. Human rights will likely be more prioritized. It will be more multilateral, less bilateral. But again, I don't think the sort of the strategic objectives around China, which is sort of to, isolate China more geopolitically, I think those will still continue. Mm-hmm. So, again, kind of base case is not much change on the China policy as it relates to a Biden win versus a Trump win.